Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Sometimes the path to becoming a PR communications professional, a well-known person in your niche, and certainly among your clients, takes a kind of interesting turn here and there. And my guest today is a great example of what happens when you start in one field and you end up finding your way in PR and communications. Now, Janet Falk, who I'm so pleased to bring you as my guest today, started off with Spanish language, moved on to financial analysis, textual analysis, actually. And from Wall Street, went in a very different direction, straight towards PR and communications. So I hope you're ready to hear about a really interesting journey, some real practical information and advice about how to succeed as a PR professional, as a communicator, and probably some lessons that you can draw in no matter what career you're in. So without further ado, let's get right into it with Janet Falk.
Thank you, Dan. Very happy to be here and see what's happening in your world.
Yeah, it's a crazy world, as you know. My listeners have been listening to me talk about, PR and marketing, communications, and now recently purpose and kind of more of these high level, what are we doing here? What's the meaning of life type questions here and there. And I think that we're going to hit some of that today. But, I wanted to start off really by just giving you the floor for a while or for as long as you like. And, why don't you tell us about your journey a little bit? And, you can be as specific or as general, but tell us about, who is Janet Falk and, all about Falk Communications and what you're up to.
If you've been to my website, Dan, which I assume you have, then you've seen my logo because you don't have my business card, obviously.
Right.
And my logo is in letter F inside an octagon. And I use the octagon because I am not a round peg. I am not a square peg. I'm an octagonal peg. And I'm not like most of the people that you meet in the communications field. My experience crosses many boundaries. I've been in academic, I've worked in nonprofit, I've worked on Wall Street, as you mentioned, and I also work with attorneys. So you can see that it's a very broad span of industries and activities. More people in public relations tend to focus on a niche, whether it's healthcare or lifestyle, and I'm a generalist. And I very much appreciate the fact that working with so many different clients gives me a window into different industries. And also, I can bring the solution I developed for one client to bear in another setting. So, starting from the beginning, I have a PhD in Spanish language and literature, and I taught at the college level for a few years. And when I realized that I was not going to get tenure at that particular institution of higher learning, then I took a class. It was something like an executive MBA, an intensive series of classes on accounting, marketing, finance, career development, and corporate strategy. And from that, I catapulted to working as an analyst on Wall Street. And every day, instead of doing close textual analysis of Spanish epic poetry, instead I was doing close textual analysis of financial statements. So there aren't that many people I have met in my public relations career who can actually read a balance sheet and an income statement and understand how it is that money is being made.
I can absolutely vouch for that.
Yeah.
being a PR guy, I've said this before and I'll say it again. When I embarked on this career of mine, I was one of the big attractors is that there wasn't supposed to be any math involved, right? I mean,
Many people have said that.
Right? Obviously, now we live in the digital age. I mean, it's been 20 years since I made that statement or a little more, but now we live in digital age and there is plenty of math and plenty of analytics. And, I mean, my previous guest is all about that, fellow Dan Golden. And we talked about this recently, but, I am just like, I think maybe when you started out, Janet, and you're like well, first of all, going from Spanish to like such a analytical career to the analytical skills that you'd have, like counting and finance and so on, that's a big change. And then taking that and running with it into your career is another. Um, but
So
I mean,
let me
yeah,
go a little further here
sure,
and
please.
tell you how this works further. So what happened was in my role as a securities analyst, I was forever talking to the investor relations professional.
Mm,
Now you know who that person is, Dan, but for some of your audience who may not, that is the person who communicates about the company to the Wall Street community, whether it's the analysts who are promoting the opportunity to invest in the stock, or it's the portfolio managers and asset managers who are deciding whether or not to invest in this stock. And it seemed to me in my conversations with the investor relations professionals that that was like teaching because I was gathering information and then sharing it with a discrete audience to persuade them of my point of view. At that point, I took a class in investor relations and I had a very interesting experience. And this just shows you the math aspect of this. The instructor, recognizing that I was a securities analyst, asked me if I would explain aspects of finance that related to investor relations, which I was very happy to do because, after all, I was a former college professor. I was very comfortable standing in front of a room talking to a few people. And at the end of the presentation, I had explained about operating margin and profitability.
mhm.
Now, one of the members of the class, who was, I will say, without disparagement, a junior account executive, said, "We have a young and dynamic management team at our client's company." And I said, "Well, does that mean I should give them an additional 0.3% on their operating margin?" So you can see this completely went over this person's head.
Yeah,
They did not understand how it was that I analyzed what a company was up to by looking at its financial statements and what that would mean.
yeah.
So, from that experience, I began networking and I got a job ultimately at the public relations agency of one of my classmates' employers. And that was a lot of fun. And I lasted there less than a year because
What
they
happens?
acquired another
Uh,
company and I was underbilling, so I was on my own. So I had a variety of jobs at different public relations agencies and Wall Street firms, always in a marketing and communications and public relations field, and occasionally at nonprofits. And then my last full time job was at an agency whose principal client was a well known law firm. It's one of the top 50 law firms here in the US. And my job was to get the attorneys quoted in the news. And I had not worked with attorneys previously at firms. I had worked with them in nonprofits, but not at firms. And I was relentless and very successful at getting these attorneys quoted in the news. Sadly, in December 2008, there was a financial crisis that was
yeah.
affecting most of the Wall Street community and many other businesses. And the law firm cut back on its marketing and public relations budget. And myself and another employee were terminated. So since that time, I've been working independently
Mhm.
and I have to bring in my own business. And then I have to do the work for the clients. And then I have to promote myself so that I can get more clients. So that's one of the good things about being an octagonal peg is that I'm not shy about getting out there and promoting myself because I recognize that I am the business
Mhm.
and I have to do what I can to raise awareness of my services and raise awareness of me as the solution
Yeah.
to meet the needs of prospective clients.
Well, I mean, you're clearly no stranger to personal branding. I mean, this is what a great exercise in and a lesson almost in taking strength to strength and building on understanding what your value is. What you have there is, I mean, clearly, it's fairly unique among communications professionals. I mean, not many people can explain. Very few people, I think, can explain the intricacies of securities trading or investments to anyone else. Really, it tends to be an insider's game. So when you're talking about investor relations, you need to have people could be external focused and translate. You need translators to get that language. It's not about having a young, dynamic management team, like you said. It's about operating profits and so on. And by the way, in case I haven't revealed this so far, I'm terrible with investor relations stuff. Right? I mean, it is certainly not in my strong suit, or not in my main, I guess, toolkit. I understand it enough to be an in-house generalist. Um, but look, what really stuck in my head as you kept speaking is the octagonal peg thing, and I can't, I I think it's so apt because we always think about where we fit, like what's our fit in this world, what's our fit in our career, and I've had this same issue. Like you look at the most basic level, you want to apply to a new job, or you want to like go for a new client or something, whatever it is, and you're looking at this list of criteria that they have. And this criteria is okay, A, B, C, D, E. And you're like, well, I have B and C, but then I'm like F, G, H, I, J. So I don't quite fit. And you pass along. And then you do the same thing again and again. And eventually you're just like, there's nothing out there that fits me. So it helps to come to the realization, wait a second, these people are looking for a round peg for a round hole, or a square peg for a square hole. I'm an octagonal peg. I'm a triangular peg. I'm whatever. So I have to really find the right, match for me, or I have to make it happen and point out to this person or to this company or this client that what they're really looking for is something far more complex and far more nuanced. Who wants a regular circle when you can have an octagon or a hexagon or something?
Right, right. I mean, I would point out that in the world of finance, I have worked in equity research, fixed income, operations, private equity, and investment banking. And every time I was hired, it was the first time that I was working in that particular corner of the market.
Yeah.
So basically, a person was hiring me saying, this woman is articulate, she's analytical, she's strategic, she's smart, she can learn our business. And in fact, I had a boss who hired me at a nonprofit organization, and part of the job was fundraising.
Hmm.
And in the course of our interview, I viewed it as an opportunity for him to present a problem to me, and then I would reflect on my experience or an idea that I had, and I would come up with a solution. So we're getting towards the end of the interview where we have been passing the ball back and forth very successfully on my part. And I mentioned, you have not discussed my limited experience in fundraising, because I knew it was a part of the job and I knew that I really didn't have that experience. And his answer to me was, you're a smart person. You can go to the fundraising center and take a class.
Excellent. I love when you meet people like that across your career, who are willing to know or to see that you've got the basics, you have the potential, you have the um, aptitude. So all you need to do is now learn, right? And you got to be held accountable to that learning curve, of course. But the fact that you can do it shouldn't be in question. Especially if you know how to reinvent yourself again and again.
Right, right. I can't tell you how many times now, as a consultant, I'm dealing with a client and it's the first time I'm working in that business. And I had one client who gave me a great testimonial. Can I tell you that
Sure,
story?
please, yeah, yeah, of course.
So, this client was in a niche business in the credit card industry, and he had a few clients in the hotel industry. And I won't go into the details of exactly what he did, but he used to save his hotel clients hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
So I took his story and I worked it up as a case study. And I got testimonials from two of his hotel clients who were very well known in the industry. And I shared this with three hotel industry publications. And basically, this was like a Christmas gift, right? Because I had the theme. Here's a way that you can save money as a hotel on this aspect of your credit card. Here's a source who can talk about how you can do that. And here are clients who will give testimonials. So, from the perspective of the reporter, the story pretty much writes itself.
Mhm.
right? Because they got the idea, they got the source, and they got the testimonial of the
Yeah.
third party who can say, yes, in fact, we used this service and it worked for us. Now I have contacted these 3 hotel industry publications, and they all of them run the story about this client and the service.
Brilliant.
Now, Dan, can you imagine? Take a guess. How many calls did the client receive coming from those 3 hotel industry publications with an article about how they could be saving hundreds of thousands of dollars?
I can't even imagine how many calls they must have got. It was, must have been dozens, if not like
Many more than dozens,
hundreds.
800.
800 calls.
800 calls. 800 calls. Now, Dan, imagine you buy a list of hotel industry CFOs.
Mhm.
You email them, you call them. They're not paying attention to you.
No, of course not.
They're getting calls and emails all day long. They're trying to do their job, right? They read an article about saving hundreds of thousands of dollars that their colleagues and competitors are doing. Naturally, they want to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So the testimonial that I got from this client was Janet didn't know anything about our business when she started working with us. Now she totally gets it, and she makes sure that the reporters get it too.
And that's like the best thing that you can do as an agent, as a partner in communications for your client is to basically be able to tell their story so in such a way that the media has no choice, or whoever your targets are have no choice but to tell it. Like, you make it so easy for them to
Right,
tell a good and compelling story. And
right, right,
yeah, well, I
right.
imagine though, I imagine that with your analytical mind, but also with the background that you had, to pull that story part into, find that kernel of truth and that nugget of, I guess the what's the word I'm looking for? That kind of,
Insight?
the
Yeah.
insight, to find
Mhm.
that, the insight. Yeah. Um, that was, that's what did it for these reporters. But you also spoon fed them the story, so they were able. You made their lives easier. You made your client happy. Makes
Right,
perfect sense.
right.
Good.
So
It's a good gag.
I try to think like a reporter,
Mhm.
and I think about the 5 W's. Dan, you know the 5 W's, right?
Yep. Who, what, when, where, why, how. Oh, well, not how. But who, what, when, where, why.
Right. Who, what, when, where, why. So, who is it that my client was trying to reach in this instance, right? People in the hotel industry.
Mhm.
So, what did my client want them to think about? How they could save money. Where were they going to be looking for this information? In hotel industry publications. And when? Well, this is really a timeless story. It's not pegged to any holiday. It's not pegged to tax day. It's not pegged to any change in the law or any change in regulation. And so, why? Well, who doesn't want to save money,
Yeah.
right? So, think this is my suggestion to your listeners is think like a reporter
Mhm.
and think of the who your audience is, what they care about, when is it time sensitive, where are they looking for information, and why should they care? Because this is how I always frame my work with clients is to answer a few questions from the perspective of a reporter. So a reporter is going to ask, why you? Why should anyone talk to you and not your colleague in the same building or your competitor across town? How do you show that you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the marketplace? So that's the first question is why you?
Mhm.
The second question a reporter is going to ask is why now? You didn't call me last week or last month. So why should I be talking to you now? What is different that everybody needs to know about? In other words, has there been a recent mergers and acquisitions transaction, or has there been a safety recall of some product, or is this tied to some holiday event or something
Mhm.
like that? So why you? Why now? And now the most important question is why should anyone care?
Yep.
How will this kernel or this insight help someone else, whether it's an individual or a business owner or even a corporation? How will this insight help someone else to save time, save money, or make more money? Right? And so this is where my Wall Street background comes to play because it's always about saving time, saving money, and making more money. So, in the case of this vendor who had the business related to credit cards, he was saving you time,
Mhm.
he was saving you money. And because you were using his service, you didn't have to think about it anymore. You could focus on what you were doing with your business and you could make more money.
Exactly. You're working, what is it, on the business instead of in the business.
Right,
That makes sense. And if you can do that as a, people don't understand, I think a lot of people don't understand that a good communications ally, a good communicator will uncover these insights and be able to affect the bottom line, affect the effectiveness of your business, your operations, everything. It's not just about, hey, let's do a press release, which I think is I think we're way past that as a profession for sure. But you know, companies that know, but there's still plenty of folks out there who still think that, well, you guys write press releases. And I'm glad you're on the program because, you're clearly evidence that that is not the case. And most of the people I talk to are, but, that it's clearly been an evolution in this industry.
right.
You've seen a lot in your time, and certainly the way that you've kind of invented yourself as a PR professional, and gone after it in your own way, but also the kind of the way you meld research and insight into what you do is an evolution in of itself in PR and in communications. So, like, what are some of the ways that you've seen the industry evolve, and how have you either taken advantage of that, or what do you see as the important things to take from that?
I was thinking about this because you have to remember I started my career in public relations in 1989.
Mhm.
And this might be before your time.
It's before my time in PR, but it's just as I was starting college, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So back in the day, we used to send press releases by fax machine.
Fax machine.
And it was a very tricky business because you had to make sure that everybody got the press release at more or less the same time. You couldn't give advantage to a particular publication or to a particular securities analyst. So, it's hard for some listeners, I'm sure, to recognize those days, but that was part of it. And another part of it was having in person meetings and conference calls with the analysts to share what were the latest quarterly results and so on and so forth. Now, over time, as you know, this has been transformed to everybody getting everything by email. And now we're having more events that are being held virtually.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that makes it very difficult is not because we're working in remote locations, but we are inundated by so much information through email and through social media that it's very difficult to catch a reporter's attention and
Yeah.
to distract them from everything else that is populating their inbox. That means that it's really up to the communicator
Mhm.
to find a way through language and also through persistence to get the reporter to be interested in the story that you have to tell them. And as I said, the way to do that is to think like a reporter and
Yeah.
show, why this is important, why this person is a good source, and why the audience should care because they will ultimately benefit from having this insight or this service explained to them so that they can save time, save money, and make more money. Now, I want to point something out, which is that a statistic says that there are 6 times the
Mhm.
number of public relations professionals as there are reporters.
Not surprising.
So here you are, swimming against the tide with so many of your competitors who are trying to get the reporter's attention. And that's not to mention the do it yourselfers who are, small business owners who
Mhm.
aren't using a professional and who need that press attention in order to grow their business. At the same time, there's another dynamic at play in the market. I'm sure you're very familiar with this, and that is reporters are under even more pressure to turn stories around quickly.
Mhm.
So it used to be that you could have a situation and a reporter would ask for some third party who wasn't connected to anyone that's going on, anyone that's participating in the situation, but someone who, as an observer, can comment on what this means for everybody else. Well, because of the pressure to turn stories around more quickly, stories are getting shorter, and there isn't room for that third party quote any longer.
Yeah.
Plus, there are, so many other avenues for people to be distributing their
Mhm.
news, right? Through their own podcasts and their own blogs and,
Mhm.
Medium and, other kinds of forums.
Yeah.
So the dynamic of the media creation and distribution system has so totally changed that it makes it more of an uphill battle than it ever was before for professionals like myself to get the attention of reporters and make them want to pay mind
Yeah.
to the service and the clients that we represent.
Well, and not to mention the recent trend, and when I say recent, I mean maybe the last 5 years, could be 10 years, but certainly since social media really hit hard, and since the internet made everything accessible to everyone. Since anybody with a keyboard and internet connection could suddenly be a citizen journalist. Remember
Right.
when they used to call bloggers citizen journalists, and then they call them, and then there's something else, and now we have podcasters. Who maybe in the day could have been a ham radio operator. I don't know, but it's crazy how some of these things just migrate. They're the same roles, but they migrate over time. But by the way, I love podcasting. I don't consider. I never thought of this as like, a reporting or a media platform. I just always thought of it as an art form, or as a way to have these wonderful conversations, almost to entertain. But now, of course, now after doing this a bit, now I know because I'm getting pitched. You know,
Mhm.
I know now. I'm like, holy crap! I'm in the media. Sometimes it's hard for me to shoulder that burden being on the inside. So what I was going to say is the other thing that I would add to the kind of changed landscape that you described is the rise of the brand journalists. So like brands and companies just cutting out the journalists completely and going straight to publishing. So all brands and are have fancied themselves as a publisher in some way. Some are better than others. I think maybe some of this has maybe peaked a couple of years back, and people are very wary of this of what brand journalism is. But still, companies now have just as much of an ability to put up a website, publish their own channels, create a multitude of channels, hire those journalists. One of the reasons why there's 6 times more PR pros as there are reporters is because a lot of the people who would become reporters instead went into industry because, hey, they can spend all their time if they're into writing and they're really uh, who would have been an excellent journalist. Why not just work for a major brand, a GE, a well, I know GE is probably not the best example, but like an IBM or a Procter and Gamble or one of these other big companies who are going to pay you really well, so you can run an editorial desk inside the company. So I mean, it's a very
Dan,
yeah.
that's called going over to the dark side.
I'm very aware. Going from was it going from flack to hack? Is that what it is, or hack to
Yes,
flack?
but when
Yeah.
people say that I'm a flack because my name is spelled Falk, I consider it a typo.
Good for you. I love that. Your name is an anagram for almost. There's no C, but it's it's very funny. But that's the industry. That's the environment we're living in, right? And it makes it all the more partly impressive, but also it makes it more critical to have an analytical and a methodical and strategic approach to the way that you do your that you serve your clients, or that you offer stories up. I would say so. The idea of being able to come up with the insight that's going to be the hook for the reporter has not changed at all. It's just become more intense and more kind of maybe time bound in many ways. But it's definitely become more competitive, and the standards are higher, I think, now to get that story into certainly into mainstream media or into major media outlets.
Right, right. So
Yeah,
I want to raise a couple points here.
please.
One is that not everything is a story that other people need to hear about.
Here, here.
Okay, so if you can't find a way that it's going to respond to some of the issues that I've pointed out of the who, what, when, where, why, or how does this help someone else save time, save money, make more money, then maybe it's not a story that's worth pursuing or worth talking about. For example, every day of the year is a different day, right? I'm not talking about Mother's Day, Father's Day, graduation, and so on. I'm talking about National such and such
Hmm.
comestible product day. And
Yes,
and there are more than one of those kinds of days, every single
every
day,
day.
right? So you can forget about that, right? That is not a story idea. And another thing that you have to think about is it's not enough to deliver the story idea and the source and the testimonial as a Christmas gift, as I mentioned earlier. You have to be quotable.
Mhm.
You have to say something that other people are going to latch onto and want to remember. And that's going to make your story more memorable. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. But the third thing I want to say is that just because it's online doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's a fact, and doesn't mean it's relevant. No, everything that you see on a website was written by someone who is either inside or was paid by someone who is inside. Everything that you see on a LinkedIn profile, right, was written by the person or by someone who was paid to write it.
Mhm.
And yet, when we see things online, we do not discount the fact that they are self-promotional,
Right.
right? So it's really difficult, and I think is a real test for the digital generation that's going to be running businesses to remind them and to be alert to the fact that just because it's online doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. And you still have to get the facts and you have to be aware of where the source is.
Yep.
So when you see things that used to be in magazines and still are magazines and newspapers that are advertorial,
Mhm.
you know that that was paid for. And when you're online and you're looking at a website and something comes up underneath as sponsored content, that you know that that was paid for. But there are other times when you could be on a company website or on an individual business owner's website, and you wouldn't know how true or how not true that was. And so
Mhm.
that's something that I keep in mind also
Yeah. In
when
fact.
I'm looking for opportunities to
Mhm.
introduce my clients to publications. Is this a worthwhile publication?
Yeah.
Are my client's target audience going to find it there?
Yeah.
And that's very important. So now I want to seg back to what I said about being quotable, if that's okay.
Yeah. Please.
So I like to use the 4 A's,
Mhm.
right? And this is something that listeners can think about so that they can be more quotable. So the first A is acronym, right? If you come up with an acronym and you say it to a reporter, then you have to explain what it is, right? So an example of an acronym is COVID-19,
Mhm.
right? Before November, nobody knew what COVID 19 was. Now we talk about nothing else. COVID 19 stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019.
Yeah.
But that's too long to say, so we just call it COVID. We don't even say 19 anymore.
Yep.
So, one thing that you can do in explaining the value or the importance of what your topic is to use an acronym because then you immediately have to explain what it is and then it'll stick in the reporter's mind. The next thing is you can use an analogy. You can say something is as clear as mud or as clear as day, and that'll also help.
Mhm.
The next thing you can do is you can use an anecdote. Earlier, I spoke about the client in the credit card niche business, and I gave the example of how I had worked with this client and produced the amazing result of 800 incoming phone calls. That's an anecdote. So you have acronym, analogy, anecdote, and now here's the fourth A, alliteration.
Oh, I love it.
Need I explain?
No, you need not needlessly. I'm trying to force a little bit. Yeah, I love me some alliteration. Yes. Yeah, and that I guess that's a fun one for any of us who are creative copywriting type people, from in our hearts and souls. Um, I love the four A's. These are the kind of guidelines that you can just walk away with, put in your pocket, and say, yeah, I could, make a checklist, and does my quote match these four
Well,
things?
pick any one.
Yeah,
You can't
yeah,
do all four. Pick
sure,
any
sure.
one, and there are others, but those are good for starters.
Yeah. Well, just to circle back a little bit, you talked about we were talking about essentially the the fact that you can find any information out there, uh, that's not clearly marked as news or as fact, and be kind of convinced in some way that it is, or like people, it's easy to fall into this trap. You can, when you see clearly branded, clearly note when something's clearly labeled branded content, advertorial, it's paid for. um, but one thing that occurred to me while you're talking about that is this idea that people confuse truth and relevance with emotion, right? So this emotive, you know, uh, getting eliciting an emotion from the reader, and creating that connection with the content automatically kind of cannot automatically dispel the fact or truth of it, and just make it feel real, or feel like, you hear that a lot now. I feel it's good. I feel that it's real. I feel like they're telling the truth. You should never feel that they're telling the truth. Either they're telling the truth or they're not telling the truth. Either it's a fact or it's not a fact. But the amount of content that's out there these days, and the competition for people, almost makes it a necessity to inject a kind of, emotion into what would normally have been a fact-based piece, or what should be a fact-based piece, but is now couched in this sort of emotional language. um, you know what do you think is, like, I see that as a kind of, it's like there's a good side to this and a bad side to this, right? I mean, on the positive side, creating these relationships with your readers is a very good thing, right? You want to keep people coming back, especially if you have something good and you're improving their lives, or you're serving, or whatever. But on the flip side, you know, uh, seeding people with falsehoods, in the middle, by covering them or blanketing them in emotional language, is a dangerous thing. We've seen a lot of this happen, certainly for decades, but it's more, I think, more prevalent now. I mean, what do you think are like, those are some serious pitfalls that I think, modern communicators need to look out for. What do you think are some of the things, like including that or other things, that people should be aware of, you know, in this field, or as they're trying to ingest information, that um, you know, the communicator really needs to be aware of? What are the pitfalls of our job, essentially?
That is a meaty question. I'm
Sorry,
gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna come
I'm
up
good at
with
those.
some thoughts here, kind of off the cuff. So the
Yeah.
first thing is, and I'm sure you're aware of this, who is the product, right?
Mhm.
And who is the source, right? And it's been said about social media that you are the product, right? Because you are being manipulated to stay on that platform and to do more things with that platform and so on. So we have to be ourselves questioning how that news story or that article came to be, and whose interest is it in, and what is it that they're asking us to do as a result of having read this. Are they asking us to make a purchase? Are they asking us to contribute dollars? Are they asking us to go next door to our neighbor and share this information with our neighbor? So I think we need to maintain some sort of distance, critical distance from what we read, and say, How did this come to my attention? Is this a trustworthy source? And what is it that I'm being asked to do? And what responsibility do I have having read this? There are people who share information that is of a dubious nature, and other people look into it further and say you shouldn't have shared this information. It's of a dubious nature, and this is why.
Yeah.
Now, on the other
Yeah.
hand, there are people who do make their business through hype, and I know someone who's recently published a book about this. So please remind me of that, and I'll give you that information later.
Okay.
But there's a third person who I know says that you cannot make a decision without invoking emotion. That if you don't have emotion tied up in the decision, then you'll just waffle and you won't decide. So as nefarious as it might seem to be blanketing people with content that's going to push their emotional buttons, in fact, it is somewhat helpful to be doing that because it will bring you to the point where you're able to make a decision.
Yeah.
And one more thing here, which is there's so much made of reviews, right? Reviews on Yelp,
Yeah.
reviews on Google, and so on. And ask yourself when you're looking at one of these reviews on Amazon or some other product site, why am I believing the experience of someone that I've never met, have no reason to know that they're an authority, right? Shouldn't I be making this decision for myself? It's only when you see a plethora of reviews that'll give you the idea that something is good or bad. But one review, two reviews in and of themselves should cause you to ask yourself, why am I listening to the information or the perspective of someone that I don't know? And this goes back to my why you, why now thought, right?
Yeah.
Why am I
Yeah.
granting authority to this person? And and do I recognize that I may be subject to manipulation and misinformation? So it really means that we have
Yeah.
to keep our head on our shoulders and be alert to how these articles come to our attention.
Yeah. Imagine that we have to be smart, we have to be thinkers. The best way to defend yourself against being manipulated is to think things through. So it's so fundamental. That was a great point about reviews. And I haven't thought about that recently. But now that you mention it, you know, the idea of reviews is always supposed to be almost the backbone to why social media is so powerful for sales because you're looking at people like me, people like you who have bought the product or used the service or read the piece and are happy with it. So if they're happy with it, then they're like me, so I should be happy with it too. And to a degree, I think in the when this all started out, maybe that was more true than it is now. Maybe it's still true to a degree, sure. Like you want to see when something is reviewed properly, you want to make sure that gives you a little bit of a validation that the behavior that you're about to embark on is real. But I think just like with anything else, now we have to look at it with a high degree of skepticism. Look, I have whatever number of reviews on my podcast, just as an example, right? Maybe if I'm lucky, it's 20, right? And by the way, anybody listening out there, if you want to give me a review, please do. But it's like maybe 20 reviews on Apple, and I have whatever it is, number of stars. I've seen podcasts that have 40,000 reviews, 30,000 reviews, whatever. Obscure podcasts, not like the Joe Rogan show or, some of these big ones like NPR's podcast or something like this. No, some guy, some lady out in the middle of something, talking about nail polish, 50,000 reviews. There's something wrong with this. Now, I'm not saying without having listened to these podcasts, I will not disparage them at all. Maybe they're fantastic. But I also know for a fact that I get pitched or, get inquiries on a regular basis from review farms in Asia, and they're usually in Asia, who are gonna who say that they'll take your podcast and, for a certain fee, you'll get tons and tons of listeners and tons of reviews. It is completely unethical. It's not illegal, right? But it is very deceptive. Um, I know that people do this. So if they do that for podcasts, they absolutely do that on Amazon. I mean, if you're buying a widget of some kind, I recently bought some material to cover up a hole in the drywall for my house. This material is just commonly available everywhere. But I go on Amazon and there's 400 variants of the same thing because it's made in one factory somewhere and then it's white labeled and repackaged and sent all over the place. So I'm going, which one am I going to get? And the top one has, you know, 500 and 200, 500, 1,000 4-star reviews or 5-star reviews. And then there's one that has 3, 4, 5-star reviews. They're the exact same product. So we are inundated with these choices that we shouldn't have to make, you know? And I'm going around and around, but I think what that whole point about reviews is brilliant, Janet. I think because that's so manipulative now that you mention it. And it's the same thing with with your corporate social media. You want to get the likes, you want to get the engagements.
Yeah, and
So
one thing,
mm,
there is a downside to this, Dan. I'm a member of an organization, and there was some discontent in the organization with the leadership, and some people left the organization and posted negative reviews about it.
yeah.
Now, those of us who were supporters of the organization feel that this disinformation, negative information, is floating out there in the digital sphere, and it's going to discourage newcomers from learning about the organization and wanting to participate. So this is a reputation management issue, which I'm
Hmm.
sure is a very big part of your job,
Yep.
because you're always concerned about how your brand is being seen by customers and employees and vendors and competitors and regulators and so on. So the one side of reviews is, how do you know what to believe when it's positive, and then how do you know what to believe when it's negative,
Hmm.
and what can you do about that? And
Especially,
without
yeah.
going too far down the road, I mean, just as you're saying, you have these review farms. Well, you also have people who use black hat technology to push things down or make them go
Yep.
away, right? And
Yep.
that
And
and
that
that is an issue as well.
it's been around since the beginning of search, and it's not going to go away. It's just a matter of the platforms are getting better with with their AI to identify and remove such fraudulent material, and I hope that they get there at some point. But it's just it's crazy. It goes in both ways, and you know there are I've you talk about anecdote. I mean, um, I had I've been in a company, and I'm not going to name the company, but I've been an employee of a company where there's a popular recruitment site called Glassdoor that has ratings of every company, every employer, and when you're for new candidates and job seekers, you often go to Glassdoor to find out what the rating is of this company. What's the rating of the CEO? What do employees think? And you're looking at these, whatever the reviews are. Now, this company had asked all of its employees, like 3 weeks after they joined the company, right? Write a review for Glassdoor. Go on as, hey, you've completed your orientation. You're now working in whatever this business is. You're familiar with your boss, your teammates. You've gone out to lunch twice. You've been to dinner a few times. Go ahead and do a review. So you get this email from HR says, yeah, hey, here's the link to our Glassdoor. Go ahead. So you go and do it, right? And then you realize that the ratings for the company are superior. They're superior because when you get somebody 3 weeks in, it's a great time. Now, do the same thing 6 months in, and you have a vastly different story to tell. Well, hopefully not terrible, not too vastly different, but you will not be nearly as positive, and certainly, it'll be much more realistic to the work experience. Because at that particular company, by 6 or 8 months in, I was ready to go. Right? It wasn't, and by the way, for the record, wasn't because I had anything against the people I was working with or working for. It just simply wasn't a fit for me. And under that circumstance, why would I want to go out of my way and say, how amazing everything is in the company when, in fact, I'm the wrong person to ask. I don't really have standing, is kind of what I felt. So yeah, it's one of those. it's one of those reviews are definitely a double edged or triple edged or quadruple edged sword. It's just something we have to constantly be on the lookout for as communicators. So,
Right, right.
so
So
glad you
you
brought that
have to
up.
be thinking
Yeah.
of the review or of the article, how did this come to light? And does this person have an agenda?
Yeah.
And is that agenda aligned with my own? Right? Because if you're talking about, should I buy this toy for a child aged X, then you're going to look for reviews of people who have children age X and what it is that they have to say. And it's very likely that your agendas will be aligned. But in
Yeah.
terms of careers or in terms of other major purchases, there are a lot of other factors, and just be
Yeah.
alert to that and how you are invoking emotion to make a major decision, a life decision. But at the same time, is this veritable information, and how can you evaluate the truth of it? How can you evaluate the source of it? Especially when it says Dan N, vice president of marketing and communications at major manufacturing company. Who
Yeah.
knows who Dan N
Who
is?
knows? Anybody. Could be any. Who is that guy?
Right,
I wouldn't trust
right,
him.
right.
You
All of
know?
the testimonials on my website, all
Mhm.
the recommendations on my LinkedIn profile, they all have the full name of the person, and you can identify the company if you wanted to find out
Yep.
more about me.
Yeah, and that's the kind of transparency that we need, I think, now. I mean, especially now as Mark Schaefer has said, another one of our mutual connections, I believe. But as Mark Schaefer has said, the customer's in charge. He's not the only one who said this, but marketers really just need to know the customer is in charge. And if we don't understand this, and when I say marketers, I'm including communicators in that bunch. But if we don't understand this, we're going to get into serious trouble. So, what is just like you said, if you have to be essentially put yourself in the shoes of, you know, you have to answer the question, why me, why here, why now? And if you are anything other than forthright and transparent, you're going to be in trouble in this business. So that which kind of brings me to, I suppose, my almost maybe my last question, Janet. I can't believe time has gone so quickly here. But I wanted to, like, I probably know the answer to this already, but you know, what in your mind then makes we have all these things to look out for, that it's a minefield out there for us. And we have to deliver insights. We have to really keep the customer in mind. We have to think like a reporter. There's so many, different things buzzing around in our heads. What makes a really good communicator in your mind? Like, what is it that separates the wheat from the chaff? So
I think I've given examples of how I
yeah,
approach a situation, which is to understand where the person is now and who else should be sitting around the table having that
yeah,
conversation, right? Is it the employees? Is it the visitors to a destination? If you are a destination, I did work for one of those.
mhm,
Is it your vendors who you want to make sure that they understand um, the value of the mutual relationship? Is it the regulators who are looking at your industry and who have the ability to shut you down? Is it the residents of the community and the neighbors in which you're operating? And
mhm,
and also your competitors. So I think
yeah,
the ability to envision who else is sitting around the table with you and what their agenda is, where
mhm,
your interests align, where they conflict, and then developing the communication that's going to solidify that relationship. I
yeah,
often speak to a class on marketing. I'm brought in to talk about public relations. And what I
mhm,
say is public relations is a strategic communication process that develops mutually beneficial relationships with discrete audiences. And marketing, on the other hand, marketing is on a transactional basis where you have the exchange of money for goods or services. So if you're envisioning who else is sitting around your table, as I've said, and how you can be in this mutually beneficial relationship by having an ongoing conversation. And then you're thinking about where are the platforms where such people are looking for information? Is it industry publications, like I mentioned before? Is it through your website? Is it through your monthly or quarterly newsletter? Is it through speaking engagements where people are going to be able to hear you and understand what it is that you're about? Is it through, other digital presence? So understanding who's sitting around the table, what they care about, what you bring to the party, where they're looking for information. I think that is what's essential in a communication role. And that's what I
Yeah.
bring to the table, and I'm sure that's what you bring to the table, and
Try.
many of our peers.
Yeah. So it's all about it's so critical to know who you're talking, like just to know everything about everybody. You have to be all knowing, all knowledgeable to be a good communicator. You've heard it here, folks. It's a very very relationship based you know role, and certainly to to be successful, to be a good communicator. I completely agree with everything that you said, Janet. But it's all about that relationship that you have with your various stakeholders and understanding their positions. Um,
But at the same time, I want
it's
to
yeah,
tell you that many's the time that I contacted a reporter for the first
mhm,
time and got them to be interested in the story, right?
yeah,
Even this example of the hotels and the credit card business, I had no contact whatsoever with the hotel industry, and yet I was able to deliver these three stories that led to 800 phone calls. I have had
fantastic.
reporters that I had no contact with. I've gotten on the front page of the New York Times. I've gotten my clients on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I got a client on the Today Show. I got a client on CNBC, just from morning to afternoon.
Yeah,
So I think that if you have a good story and you
yeah,
understand how to pitch it to the reporter, that
and
that's very valuable too. If you
yeah,
have a
well,
relationship with a reporter and you don't have a good story, it's not going to fly. You're just going
yeah,
to annoy them. But if you don't have a relationship and you do have a good story, then that's what they're interested in.
and it's knowing, having that kind of either instinct or knowing through insight and through preparation, and really being very familiar with your subject and your audiences and the relationships that you have existing through with them, that the timing is right for this in the marketplace, and who to, putting those pieces together, who to contact, when to contact them. It's a puzzle to solve. It's a lot of problem solving and a lot of creativity involved with that. And like clearly you've done quite a bit in that area. And I'm so glad you're able to share those stories with us today, Janet. And I did say that was the last question. I lied. I have one other question for you. Where do you think this whole industry is going? Like, what do you think is the future of PR as we know it? Big open question.
It's very funny you say that, Dan. I have a monthly newsletter, and my December newsletter is called Tell Reporters What's in Your Crystal Ball for 2021.
Yeah,
I can't begin to predict beyond the
sure.
points that we've made earlier, right? That it remains an even more intensely competitive business because of the overabundance of people going after more scarce outlets and so on.
Mhm.
It's going to also remain more competitive because I believe there should be more skepticism and disbelief in the perspective from the perspective of the reader and the viewer. So I can only think that the things we've alluded to earlier are going to maintain and accelerate. And that's going to make it that much harder for the reader, for the reporter, and for the communicator.
Agreed, 100%. I would only add that there's all kinds of shenanigans happening on the AI front. Where I think an element of our future is going to be not only discerning what is fact and what is not fact. It's going to be discerning what is real and what is not real. And it's going to be, kind of in some ways, getting by or understanding the value that humans have with humans as technology creeps ever further into our lives. And that's something that communicators, I think, always have to be aware of.
Yeah, I would add
Um,
also that not only are they going to discern what's fact and what isn't, is they're discerning what you want to read and what you don't want to read.
Here, here. Yep.
So I'm sure that many of us feel that we're already living in our own news bubble because we look at certain sources of media and perhaps not others. And so you're going to even more narrowly focus
Mhm.
your source of information or sources of information. And,
Yeah.
and, and that can be scary. I mean, I know
Yeah.
people who subscribe to publications that are contrary to their point of view just to be on the up and up with what, so to
Yeah.
speak, the other side is thinking.
And that's, we should only hope that people are open-minded enough to do that. I, I've said this a few times, but like I think one of the opening principles in Ray Dalio's book on principle, like his book called Principles, I believe, is be radically open-minded and radically transparent. And we have to be radically open-minded as communicators and as humans. I think we really do. We have to understand that the world is not necessarily as we see it and perceive it. There are different perceptions out there, and we have to be open enough to understand that. I am again. Uh, Grateful and, well, super pleased, of course, but really grateful for you to spend your time with me today, Janet. And I just want to tell our listeners that if if you want to learn more about Janet, I definitely encourage that you do. Obviously, you can look on LinkedIn. That's where I found Janet, but look on LinkedIn for Janet Falk, Falk. Go to her website. Please visit her website, Falk Communications and Research, at Janet L. Falk. Right, there's an L in there. So janetlfalk.com. You can put the www or not, but janetlfalk.com. And you will find out not only more about Janet, but you'll find out you can subscribe to her newsletter, the publications that she's been in, especially with regard to the wealth of activities and information in professional services, financial services, and across the realms in which Janet has done her work. A lot of it's on the website. Please go and take a look. Your day will be better for it, especially if you're a communicator. And on that note, Janet, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I want to say one more thing, and that is, and I comment on this from time to time, and that is there are 5 ways to get business. So the one way is networking, which is sort of how we met.
Yep.
The second way is speaking, which is again something we're doing here, but it also means speaking to groups. The third way is writing, and I would encourage everyone to publish at least quarterly, if not monthly, a newsletter. The fourth way is being active in the trade association of your target market. So don't associate only with your own kind. Be active in the trade association of the people that you would like to be working with. And then the fifth way is everything that you do, promote it online. So, when this podcast now is going to be broadcast, you can be sure I will be sharing it in my email signature, in my activity on LinkedIn, and on my activity on Twitter, because other people are going to be looking for information and resources there. And, that is how you and I met, Dan, after all.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everyone to think about their marketing RBI, networking, speaking, writing, trade association of your target market, and promoting your digital presence.
Incredible. I have taken prodigious notes, by the way, Janet, because I like to learn things on my podcast, and I'm glad that this is no exception. I come out of this every time I spend an hour with somebody. I come out of it with hours and hours worth of assignments. I feel like of study, but I'm very, very glad for the time that you spent with me. I thank you. I'd love to have you back sometime, and have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season.
Absolutely. I wish the same to you and yours, Dan. Take care.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.